the Defence Select Committee is all here in this hybrid mode, and I'm going to invite Sarah Atherton to open up the questions. Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, gentlemen, and thank you for giving us your time this afternoon. Now, if you can start with an assessment of the delivery of the F-35 programme and the carrier strike capability. So, putting the integrated review aside, because we're going to discuss that later on, what are your main or most concerns about the F-35 programme? And if we just go in the order of Nick, Dan and Justin, please.
Thank you. In terms of the two programs together, my main focus has been on the carrier strike element to it and the carrier program. And in that respect, I would say, obviously, if you take things from the very beginning of the whole program, a very long gestation period. But as far as the carrier itself is concerned and the delivery of the carrier, it's I think been well on track as far as the most recent delivery requirements are concerned, and the ships themselves seem to be performing well. In terms of the overall package, clearly the carriers to some extent are ahead of other elements of the program, including the F-35 as far as its ability to deliver capability in the maritime context is concerned. That's still building up, and I think that the main concerns going forward for me are those extra, I suppose, enabler capabilities that need to come together in terms of the whole program as far as carrier strike is concerned in order to deliver the force capabilities and potential that the carrier strike has intrinsically in it, and those enablers include things like the Crow's Nest program, the support capabilities as far as the task group is concerned, and particularly things like the support shipping, and as far as the overall potential for the future, the hope of certain additional enablers that complete the package as far as an overall capability is concerned, regarding, for example, issues like potentially in the future organic refueling capabilities and an intra-theatre lift capability.
Okay, who would like to go next? Dan, why don't you give it a go?
Yeah, I'll go. I'd echo a lot of what Nick said there. In my last job before I left, I was the commander of the UK Carrier Strike Air Wing, and so spent time on board Queen Elizabeth, and she's certainly a very capable ship, and she's the only one, along with her sister ship Prince of Wales, who've been specifically to operate fifth generation aircraft, and that shows throughout the entire design of the ship. So things are progressing fairly well in that respect. I would echo his points on joint enablers and this supporting elements to deliver that carrier strike group. But it must be put into the context of whatever the threat is that you are going to operate against. So when people talk about what is required with that task group to deploy it, then that will certainly depend on where it is that you're sending it and what you intend to do with it. In terms of the air system and F-35 in particular, then I think the concerns for me there would primarily be around the delivery profile and therefore the speed at which you're buying those aircraft, which does affect the overall forward available fleet. Also the total numbers, but I think also the attribution to task. There is still confusion or there is still a lack of clarity over the distinct attribution to task. And that doesn't necessarily mean for a particular deployment, but it means for the force generation of that platform, of that air system, but also the through life capability management of it. So it is still currently attributed, or the understanding is is it attributed to carrier strike? Is it a carrier strike aircraft that can deliver to combat air, or is it a combat air platform that also is able to operate from the ship? And I don't deny that you want to have that flexibility, but the lack of clarity over attribution does lead to some perhaps less than good decisions that are made. And then I think the final one is over unmanned air systems, and therefore looking to the future of it, we do need to make sure that unmanned air systems that we look to bring into both combat air and carrier strike are maritime capable.
Dan, can I ask, you spoke about clarity. That leads nicely on to a few smaller questions that I had. That, how many operational aircraft do we have at present at Marham? Do you know that?
I don't know the exact figure, and I'm not sure whether we could over this means, or specifically over those that are available. But it is not where you would wish to be for the delivery of carrier strike. But we do have plans to buy more. For me, it's about the speed at which you buy them, and then the overall fleet.
Because the delivery rate is something that I'm rather concerned about. 48 aircraft by 2025, and I know you've just touched on delivery rate. Do you have any concerns about the delivery rate around COVID or the serviceability issues?
I haven't heard of any specific issues. It is providing a challenge to all the services, particularly when you combine that with sort of pre-deployment quarantine requirements and post-deployment quarantine deployment, post-deployments. That's adding a significant strain to all the armed forces, I believe.
Thank you, Dan. And same again to Justin. Thanks, Justin.
No worries. In terms of where I'd see the programme as a whole, I think the bedding in of F-35 in terms of generating a sustainable, maintainable capability and building knowledge of the jet, both in the RN side of things and the RAF, of course, it's a joint fleet, is going very well. The rate of capability increase in terms of integrating UK-specific weapons in particular is perhaps not what we would have liked, but Block 3 is now, Block 3 software is now fully integrated, and Block 4 is, quote, presumed to be funded for integration by, I think, 2025. The number of jets at Marham specifically now is 18. There's been one further delivered this year since the 17 figure was last made public, but it is 18 now, with 17 more to be delivered between now and the end of 2022. And then the discussion around the delivery rate between 22 and the end of 24, which should make up to the final 48 number, is still a case of ongoing discussion between UK authorities and Lockheed Martin. I spoke to Lockheed Martin very recently in terms of their COVID production impact. They've had an impact of between 18 and 21 aircraft reduction in total production this year, this calendar year, to the end of the year. But they anticipate that will be spread out in terms of not hitting any one customer more than one or two aircraft. And given that the scale that the UK is buying at the moment and the scale of the production line, maybe one or two aircraft is a potential upper end of the impact of COVID on their potential to deliver. Whether we are paying for and taking them is another question. But so it'd be one or two at the most, and they intend to make up any losses next year because there's considerable slack in the production line at Fort Worth. So on that area, that's probably not cause for concern that, presuming we can settle the contracts and pay up on time, 48 should be perfectly deliverable by the end of 2024. My personal concern on the F-35 program as a whole is along some of the similar lines to Dan, in that the F-35's capabilities are in effect double or triple hatted at this point in terms of where those mission effects are anticipated to be delivered. You have, obviously, it is at the centre of carrier strike, and that is a significant programme for UK defence as a whole. It is also the core of the RAF's ability to penetrate defended airspace in terms of airspace defended by modern air defence systems. That's not just the Russian threat. Algeria, for example, hardly a near peer, operates S-400 systems, is buying Chinese HQ-9, has a range of medium systems and very high-end Krasjuka 4 electronic warfare. For example, this is Algeria. So 10 to 15 years going forward, I would suggest that penetrating airspace defended by modern threat systems will be theatre entry standard for what we would now assume is relatively semi-contested interventions overseas in North Africa and the Middle East. The F-35 is the RAF's current main answer to that. So if you are also relying on that for the core of carrier strike, which may be looking to deploy, for example, to the Far East, that is a difficult ask for a fleet of 48 to 60, which I would assess be the minimum-ish for a 12 to 24 deployable force on the carriers on a regular basis. And then, of course, you also have the Army looking at how they plan to fight in a future where high-end warfighting is once again a thing. The air contribution will by necessity be mainly on SEAD and strategic efforts up front, and how they then target what they hope to produce in terms of long-range precision fires or Army aviation, for example. They're relying on the F-35 being there too. So there is a huge reliance being placed in all three of the armed services on what the F-35 can bring. My concern is not whether the airframe itself and the training that we have put around it for operators is sufficient to give the capability required. It's that there's just far too few of them to cover all of that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Chair.